Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Contact TV. I am your hostess or host, whichever you prefer, and I'm very, very excited because not only are we welcoming an incredibly brilliant and informative guest today, but I'm also going to be joined by the new co-host of Contact TV, which would be Mr. Victor Viggiani. And Victor is a well-known figure in the worlds of ufology. He is an experienced educator. He is an exopolitician, a journalist, and is also the operating officer of an alternative media company called Zealand Media. So Victor, who is an enthusiastic participant in this entire subject matter, is going to be joining myself for this episode and as many episodes to come as he wishes to participate in. And so we are both very excited to be welcoming a friend of Contact TV when it was Contact Radio, and that would be Mr. Richard Dolan. Now, Richard Dolan, since the 90s, he has been writing and speaking extensively about ufology and related matters. He is also a historian with degrees from Alfred University and the University of Rochester, where he taught for many years, as well as degrees in political theory from Exeter College, Oxford University. And this very intelligent man was also a finalist for a Rhodes Scholarship. Now, Richard Dolan is a prolific author. He's written more books than I can even mention in this short intro. But one of the things that's unique about him is he is such a knowledgeable historian that his background in Cold War history, international diplomacy, and certainly world history has enabled him to bring a unique perspective to his particular research into ufology. And of course, he has appeared on many, many television and radio programs, at many conferences. He's a well-known clinician and participant in events dealing with this type of subject matter throughout the world, often accompanied by his beautiful and lovely wife, Tracy, I must say. So it's going to be our great pleasure for Victor Viggiani and I to welcome back to Contact the intelligent, versatile, and always fascinating Richard Dolan. And hello, everyone, whether it's the evening, the morning, the afternoon, no matter what time it is or dimension, we are here and welcome to Contact TV. And as I said in my introduction, I am very, very excited that Victor Viggiani and I are welcoming back an old friend and someone who appeared on Contact Radio a number of times. And he is always brilliant and fascinating, and he looks very dapper too, I think, today. Looks very dapper. And of course, that would be Richard Dolan. Richard, thank you for taking this time away from your busy schedule to chat with us. We're so thrilled you could join us today.
Hi, Leslie, and hi, Victor. It's very good seeing both of you. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me here.
Excellent. Well, I know that Victor has been chomping at the bit. He's got some very exopolitical questions, I think, that he wants to share with you. So I'm just going to let Victor start on that end.
Good. Once again, thanks a lot, Richard, for joining us. It's
great.
I might tell you that we're coming up on the 20th anniversary, I think next year, of 2005, when you and Steve Bassett and Stanton Friedman spoke at the University of Toronto Convocation Hall with Paul Hellyer. So that's looming in the distant past. It's almost like we're re-experiencing that right now politically. So that was a big time for Canada, and I want to thank you for being part of that.
Boy, do I remember that. That was a very great moment.
It was. I recall vividly as Mr. Hellyer walked down the carpet between the seats of 400 people walking. You could hear a pin drop on the carpet, and as he took the stage, it was a momentous day. So
people
in
even
any
remember,
case,
I wonder, do even Canadians recognize the significance? Paul Hellyer was Minister of Defense, and he was also number 2 politically in Canada at one point, I believe, wasn't he?
That's very true.
He comes out in 2005 as a very, very strong believer in the UFO reality. It was quite an amazing moment.
Yeah.
He has such gravitas. You know, he was, as you said, no wonder they were silent. And he was, golly, he was an imposing figure, but the sweetest, kindest, most non-ego driven person in politics I have ever met. But I agree with you. I don't think that his true value has really been absorbed by the Canadian people. I agree with that.
I think one of the important things, I think, even is germane today, Richard, because if we had a figure similar to that today, a deputy prime minister of any country, or someone who's sitting at the table as a defense minister were to come forward today in the same way that Paul did back then, I think that might be a game changer right now at this point. And you know, I think it's important that the political figures realize how important they are in this whole process. So what I want to just start off with, to the ambivalent, to those that are in denial, or disinterested, who are watching this right now for whatever reason, they're in a position of, well, I don't have time for this. What would you say to them right now that, I wouldn't want you to try to convince them, but what would you say to them to kind of pique their interest in saying this is probably the biggest story in human history? What would you say to them?
Well, what I would say is that that's what happened to me when I began researching this about 30 years ago in the very early 1990s. I had my career path. I was on track, so I thought, to finish my PhD and teach history at some American university. That was my goal. I was studying foreign relations, national security, strategy, Cold War stuff, and fell into the UFO subject. I saw a UFO book that talked about the worldwide UFO cover-up, and I thought, oh, what's this all about? This is, again, the early 90s. And even then, you know, we were all aware that there were claims of a UFO cover-up. Most people had heard of it. I knew nothing about the details. But the thing that got my interest was simply that I was actively studying American policy of the 1950s and the late 40s. And even I knew that there was all of these claims about UFOs from that time period. We'd all heard about Roswell, 1947. And I just thought, you know, is there something to this or not? Is this total fiction, total fantasy? And if it's total fantasy, why are these people so insistent that there's something going on? And I thought, what I don't like is having this big unresolved question, especially over something that I was trying to become an expert at least so I thought. And so I bought the book. It was by the great writer Timothy Good, Above Top Secret, a classic book. And as anyone who's read that book knows, Tim Good put together a very strong collection of government documents from around the world, not just the United States, not just Canada, but European and Soviet and everywhere else that he could. And he just made a case. And the case was that these various governments and their militaries seem very, very strongly to be interested in this subject while they're denying it. And it's very hard to argue with declassified government documents. And so I remember going through it thinking, what is wrong with all of this? Like, I'm studying this subject in the university world, that is American history, and UFOs were completely absent. They just did not exist. And yet I'm reading books by Tim Good and by others that are mentioning individuals that I had studied in my own research, people's whose diaries I had read, people's whose memoirs and monographs about them had been written. And here they are in this whole other alternate universe, essentially, being placed in a UFO context. And so I just thought, I want to figure this out. I didn't expect that I would spend the rest of my life looking into it, but I definitely wanted to resolve it. And I thought I would take a few months out of my life to get to the bottom of it. And that was 30 years ago. And what I learned quickly was that focusing initially on the US aspect of it, since I'm American, was that there is an enormous repository of declassified United States military and intelligence community documents that were taking this extremely seriously. that were describing encounters by military pilots, that were describing the reactions by senior level intelligence and military officials, who all you have to do is read the document and you can see they're taking it very seriously. It's a concern. And then I thought, okay, did they ever figure this out? Did they ever resolve it? And long story short, no, they never ever got to a point where they said, oh yeah, it's all the U-2 spy plane, or it's all balloons, or it's all. They would say these things to the public, but then you could see in the classified world, no one believed those explanations. So once I realized, oh, there is a cover up, there is a concealment of information. So at that point, I was hooked. And all I wanted to do from that point onward is to learn every single thing that I could about the history, factually accurate information, and just work from there. So I guess what I would say to someone who wonders, like, why should I bother? It's a really good question. Why should you? You got an active, you have a life, you have a family, you have a job. Maybe you don't have time for this. Not everybody has time to fight the power and to dig, deep into, go down the rabbit hole, as it were. But there are always going to be people who are curious about their world, always going to exist. Many of them are probably watching this now. And all I would say is, if you have a genuine curiosity about your world and you really are tired of being spoon-fed BS about what your reality is, then, there are a couple of crowbars with which you can open up that wedge. And the UFO UAP now subject is absolutely one of those. That when you dive into it, you start to understand that there is a reality that's been, for the longest time, was ridiculed and denied. Not quite so much the same way today, but for the longest time it was ridiculed. And B, that there has been an active concealment of the most important things about it. And that's the real question, is to ask why. And that's what, all of us who study this subject, we want to know, why is this being concealed? And I have my ideas on it, as I'm sure many other people do, but it's the UFO subject it's one of those great subjects of our time that the more you dive into it, the more you really go into it, the more you realize it's almost a never-ending set of mysteries. And that actually is one reason why I think a lot of people instinctively don't go there. It's why I almost didn't. I'll just say this last, and before we move on, I guess. I think instinctively, back 30 years ago, I kind of recognized that if I were to go really deep into this could just change my whole world, which it did. And there was a big part of me that did not want that. I was on a path. I was on a track to have whatever career I was going to have. And I think instinctively I knew, if I go into this area, this is potentially going to derail what I've planned. And who wants to do that? Very few people want to. Who wants to remake their worldview once they're in their 30s? By the time you get to your 30s, you like to think you've got things figured out. And so people don't want to do that. So there are reasons why people avoid this subject, because it is radical. It is revolutionary. It will turn your understanding of reality potentially inside out if you let it.
Richard, if I could just ask you one thing. Do you think that I suppose we could refer to it as a two-tiered space program, or sometimes, the Black Ops, whatever you wish to call it. Do you think that ground zero for that was in fact, the Truman Agreement, or sometimes referred to as the Eisenhower Agreement, when in fact, this phenomena is so ancient that, the first person to report a UFO in the United States, continental United States, was Thomas Jefferson. So, I mean, this phenomena really it goes back deeply in time, and it was suppressed, and then, of course, possibly at this key point in 1947, following the Roswell crash, as the technology was dispersed to different sources, that began a kind of secrecy and lies and the bleeding of the budget to create this kind of new reality of military secrecy. Or was it a new reality?
I would say yes and no. I've given a lot of thought to the whole concept of ancient aliens. And by the way, there were earlier sightings of what we could call UFOs and potentially even USOs prior to the Thomas Jefferson
Oh, yes.
report.
Mm-hmm.
There are some, now they're all mostly, a lot of them are debatable. I mean, when you really get into the details, but some of them are pretty interesting. I will agree. I guess what I would say is when I look over the long history of sightings, allegedly, of UFOs going back centuries, and even sometimes millennia in some cases, some of them are pretty good. And in my view, a lot of them are not that good. I'm just being very blunt here. I think, I guess if we are going to study this subject as counterintelligence people would do, like we want to understand what is this phenomenon, I would say it is imperative that we be as rigorous and cold-blooded and accurate as we can be, and really understand, because it makes a difference if someone has been here forever or if someone has just arrived. That's a huge difference. And we want to know as best we can what is that difference. It's important. I've heard a lot of people say, almost reflexively, statements like, "Oh, well, they've been here forever." And I just say, who's the they? Are the gray aliens the ones who've been here forever? Them? Is it reptilians that have been here forever? Is it blonde, blue-eyed, humanoid, supermodel aliens from the Pleiades that have been here forever? Like who? Because it matters. When I look at these ancient reports, I see a lot that are very incorrectly analyzed, in my view. I think without a really proper understanding of the historical context in which many of those cases were written. A lot of them are just bizarre lights in the sky that could they be meteors? Sometimes not. Again, some of them are good, but there's very, very few. And but once you get into the 20th century, even the 19th century, what I notice is that the number of reports start to increase dramatically. Now, partly it's because we had a better ability to record them, obviously. But you go back to the 19th century, Europe or Canada or America, very literate people, and really with practically no consciousness of aerial phenomena that was unexplained. In my view, when I look back, this was not a topic of discussion. People were outdoors all the time, and yet very little made it to the public consciousness. To me, there's a reason for that, and it's probably because people really were not probably seeing that much. There were a few stories, but not anything. You go to the National UFO Reporting Center this year, you'll find 5,000 to 6,000 cases every year. MUFON, same thing. Over at Manitoba, Chris Rutkowski collects about 2,000 Canadian cases every year. There was nothing like that in the earlier years, and I've got to think something changed. And what I do think is that World War I and then World War II made it, got someone's attention. I think it was our species launching itself into the world of high-tech science and powerful technology that took a low-scale monitoring observation project and made it much more active. That's what it looks like to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's really World War II where you start getting a lot of these craft being noticed. And, in the aftermath of World War II, where it just explodes. And I don't think all of that is due to just our better ability at recording. I think some of it is, but so what happened is that my theory, it's only my own theory, is that there's very likely been some kind of semi-permanent, long-standing observational project, some kind of monitoring program that maybe got triggered when humanity, I don't know, when they said, "Oh, they've just come up with Isaac Newton and the three laws of motion," or they've discovered practical use of electricity. Who knows? Something like that would get their attention, and that's what I think has happened since then. I think now, I mean, we are the subject of great interest, very great interest. Our world, I mean, Earth itself is, of course,
on that
paradise.
point. Yeah, on that point, Richard, I'm glad Leslie brought it up, because when I hear the word "they," you're talking about implying a multiplicity of species that might be out there billions of years in advance than us. What I kind of have real difficulty with is this sort of ethnocentric idea that Earth is the only stage in the cosmos where reality is playing out. And that whole idea that we're alone in the cosmos and everything that's here is all that's important. And then all of a sudden, this reality hits us bluntly right in the forehead. Would your assessment be that whoever they are, these beings, in whatever form they're in, are they doing this elsewhere in the cosmos? I mean, or is Earth just one spot where they focus on, or are they? This is part of their whole being, and this is what they do. They just travel the cosmos and observe and watch and participate or engage. How do you see that whole issue? I think it's really important that people understand that.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't really given that one much thought. But I do think about things like the rare Earth hypothesis and things like that. We are kind of rare. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, yes, I think there's a lot of life in this universe. There's no question in my mind. But that doesn't mean that life is common, in the sense that when you look at the percentage of stars and habitable planets and how many of them have intelligent life, I'm going to guess that answer may not be all that high. And when you look at the history of our planet, we're quite unique. We have land and water. We have both. We have about 30% of this planet is covered by land, and 71% is covered by water. So, like, you could easily imagine a world that would be, if they had an asteroid bombardment early on, that it would be completely covered in water. But we're not completely. We have land. It's just like this nice balance. We have a moon that stabilizes so much of our climate to a large extent, to the extent that a lot of scientists will say, well, life might not have evolved in as stable a fashion without a moon. I don't know, but maybe that's true. We have, because the moon, or the planetoid that collided with us, which created the moon, at least in terms of our current theory, 4 billion years ago, slammed into us, and we have all these heavy metals now at the surface of the planet, which ordinarily heavy metals like iron and all the others would be farther down, and we wouldn't access them, and therefore we wouldn't have an industrial revolution the way that we did. Like, all of these things happened to Earth that made Earth kind of special. I'm not saying unique totally, but then you look at our life. We don't just have a little bit of life. We are filled with life, forests and jungles and in the oceans and even in desert regions, like everywhere. We've got all these types of life. So I have got to think that any advanced life form that is able to find this world, I'm going to be pretty darn sure that they're thinking, we need to look at this place. There's an unbelievable amount of genetic diversity. I want to know what it is. That would not surprise me. And then they find a species that's like them, that engages in abstract thought, in symbolic thinking, that has the ability to manipulate its environment like they do. Like, that's probably not every day. So I think that when they find a species like us, as primitive as we may seem, we're still really much more like them than not, because we have this executive functioning, we have the ability to engage in creative thought and to plan and to execute those plans for the manipulation of our world so that we can dominate this planet, just probably like they dominated their own. Guarantee they are probably the apex predators of their planet. They're used to getting their way too, I'm going to guess, just as we are. So I think they would find us very interesting, and maybe not quite a dime a dozen. I've never believed that. I mean, yes, I think there's a lot of life out there, but I've never really believed that it's so common that it's like, oh yeah, here's another planet with more life. Yeah, let's next. I don't think they're quite that cavalier about it. It
so they're not just passing by here.
Yeah, I think they would find us very interesting. And we have water, lots of water. We've got all these other minerals. And I think there's probably a lot of reason. And this is why I think we're probably the best show in the quadrant of this galaxy right now, because we're about, I mean, think about what we've done in just the last 200 years. We've gone from a whole world of horses and wooden carts to railroads, Morse code and telegraph, to airships and aircraft and radios and nuclear weapons and computers and iPhones and AI and genetic genetic engineering and transhumanism and quantum computing. Like, what? In a couple of generations' time, that is unlike anything that we've done in the past. And if you are an observing intelligence, you know that those humans, those pesky, smart, aggressive humans, are going through the transformative process right now, and they're going to be much more like you than they were ever at any point in the past. That's what I think.
Wow. Well, of course, we remember our friend Stanton Friedman, and he used to say that as soon as a world or a civilization figures out how their sun works, then the awareness of the power of the atom is very quickly following. And so he would, I think he believed there were plentiful societies out there and binary systems, but also we have to think now a little interdimensionally, because what we can see physically doesn't necessarily represent life that is oscillating at some higher vibration and therefore in a different kind of reality. So, and certainly people have encounters not just with physical beings, like in the case of Travis Walton or Betty and Barney Hill. There are encounters that are almost impossible to describe with beings of light, and all these types of beings are telepathic. So experiencers have a wide variety of beings that they seem to be engaging with. And some of them are densely physical, some of them are not.
Well, it just makes you wonder, are we talking about the same phenomenon, or are we talking about a different phenomenon? And this, of course, it's a discussion that's been in ufology for decades. The kind of non-physical form of communication you're talking about has been it goes back even before we had awareness of a UFO phenomenon. There's always been mediumship and an ability for people to engage in things like prophecy, and we've had shamans going back tens of thousands of years. So what are those individuals connecting to? And that's a tough question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. Is it related to what we call UFOs? I guess all I would say is maybe it's different. Maybe we're dealing with a couple of different phenomena. Probably every family in the world has one decent ghost story, if not more than that. They're everywhere. You talk to people, so everyone's got a ghost story in their family. My family has ghost stories as well. They all do. So is that the same thing? I don't know. You talk about dimensions, and maybe we are living in a dimension, and there's another parallel universes that are there that we're not familiar with. I have a hard time understanding it, but I'm not saying it's not true.
It does seem, I'll just say this one thing, it does seem that if one was looking for a commonality that experiencers have, and as someone who kind of does this work and has for many years, I would have to say it is psychic ability. That people who are having encounters, they may not be aware of it, but they have a high PSI factor when tested. And they also experience what we would call any kind of discarnate phenomena, ghost phenomena, haunts. They come in with a whole ball of wax. And, and that makes them, I think, desirable. Human beings who can communicate telepathically seem to be of primary interest.
I tend to agree with that, for the record. I've thought the same thing for a long time. If you're a hyper telepathic alien entity that's looking down at these little human beings, and you see a few who are, their consciousness capabilities are pitched a little higher. Yeah, you would be interested in those, probably.
Yeah.
And you hear anecdotally stories like this all the time. People will say, I started meditating, 6 months later, I had my first contact experience. How many times have I heard that, you know?
The other side of that coin, I'm glad Leslie brought it up, and it's a I don't know if it's controversial or not, but it's something that we're going to have to confront eventually when this all comes to some sort of fruition. But if we take a look at the other side of the coin, the political aspects, I'd like to take you there for a moment in several different ways. What I'd like to maybe address with you is the year 2017. What happened that year in the New York Times and what Leslie and Ralph and Helena Cooper all did at that time. I've used the analogy before that pre-2017 was the Old Testament in this issue, and post-2017 was the New Testament. How do you think 2017 changed the inner workings of politics and people who do the work all the time, and what impact do you think it has on people who are just coming to this issue to say, oh my goodness, how long has this been going on, and why don't I know about it?
Yeah. Well, 2017, absolutely a very important year in all of this. And for anyone who doesn't quite get what you're referring to, this was the year in December of 2017 that the New York Times published 2 headline articles on the reality of UFOs on the same day, on December 16th. They told the world that there was this video, this Tic Tac UFO from the 2004 Nimitz encounter. Very interesting. And they said to the world, oh yeah, and by the way, the Pentagon has, in fact, had a UFO program. So it was kind of important because the New York Times that's the voice of our establishment, and everyone knows it. And it was kind of a shocking thing when it came out. And in fact, those 2 articles, we know for a fact, were instrumental in spurring many people to become interested in this subject, because it suddenly became safe. It's like, oh, the establishment now is saying, maybe it's actually okay. Maybe this isn't all nonsense and there's something to it. And that's what changed. Now, what we've seen since then is that this was not a disclosure moment. A lot of us wondered. I wondered. But what I very quickly decided, and I think this is true, is that what it really signified was the beginning of a kind of battle within the national security apparatus. I think what we've seen all along are factions relating to this subject. And this goes back right to the 1940s and 50s in the US context, where there were always individuals on the inside who thought the public needs to know more about this. And there was always the other side, what one writer used to call the secrecy group. Pretty good name for it. And that, I think, has always been what's happened. And the secrecy group's always been pretty much dominant. But in 2017, you had a group of insiders who were able to get a couple of good articles to the New York Times. That was a heck of a coup that they accomplished in doing that. So since then, we've been in this kind of back and forth battle in terms of public relations, in terms of, I guess, the media. You've got some forces that are still pushing for more transparency, we can call it that. And you have other forces that are still absolutely like, you're going to pry that secret out of their cold, dead fingers. That's how their attitude is, I think. And they're just not going to give it up. And I think you see that reflected in the major media, because there are pro-UFO, UAP articles in the media, and you've got still very strongly skeptical debunking articles out there as well. So the battle for the public mind is continuing. But 2017 was the year that it really got kicked off. So it is significant.
Yeah. What about the idea of the hearings that the Grush participated in, and Graves and those individuals providing a really public stage for some of the, oh wow, they found biologics? That to me, and I watched them pretty intently several times, and the matter-of-fact way that Grush came forward and the way he stated what he stated, once again, I repeat it again to anyone watching that on YouTube or wherever it was broadcast, and they hear those words, yes, bodies were found, that would, again, I repeat, how long has this been going on and why don't we know about it? Is this progressing? Are we hearing Gillibrand open more hearings? Is this still an open book? When do we turn the next page on that? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, well, there's a lot in there. So, by the way, more hearings have been discussed, and they are apparently going to happen possibly quite soon. But let's talk about David Grush first. So David Grush is an intelligence officer, very intelligent man, who was part of the UAP task force a few years ago. So he had access to a lot of that information. He also had assignments, I believe, with the NRO, is very high level, and other high level U.S. intelligence agencies. And what he determined, I think this was as an assignment from Jay Stratton of the formerly of the ATIP OSAP program as well, another inside Pentagon UFO program. Anyway, Grush interviews, as he said, roughly 40 individuals with high-level clearances who told him a very consistent series of stories of acquisition of alien technology and alien bodies and the like. And what's amazing is that he was able to go public, and he was able to speak to a live session of Congress about that. I'll point out to folks, what Grush said is very, very important, no question. You have a vetted intelligence officer under oath to members of Congress saying these things. We have non-human biologics. That's his phrase for aliens. We got that. That's incredible. But I will also say that what Grush has stated is very much in line with 50 plus years of UFO research into what we call crash retrievals. I'm a very big admirer of the late Leonard Stringfield, who was a researcher back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And Stringfield collected hundreds of such accounts, some direct, some secondhand, some even thirdhand, but he collected them, and they are consistent, a consistent story of acquisition of alien tech and craft and bodies. And he got a lot about the structure of the secrecy as well in his research. So private researchers like Stringfield and others, he wasn't the only one, had done a very good job at collecting this information, but it didn't really matter in terms of public relations power, because, those are private researchers. Who cares what they think? Here comes David Grush, senior government official with high-level clearances, and he is coming forward to make these statements. And so that does carry some weight. That does make a difference. So I consider what David Grush has claimed to be of very high importance. And it's not surprising, by the way, that you see a lot of folks in the media, especially connected to the UFO field, a number of them still throwing rotten eggs at the man, trying to destroy his credibility. You see the same with Luis Elizondo, another person very similar, who's out there making extraordinary, powerful statements about the reality of this phenomenon, of the alien beings, of the cover-up. And I'm constantly just astonished at how viciously, and I mean viciously, both of these gentlemen have been attacked by certain quarters in this community, so-called community.
Well, it's Luis Elizondo's irritating facial hair that is really the problem. That's really the whole thing.
Is that it?
I
Is that
can't
what it was?
even look at him. But
wondered.
anyway, no, I'm joking. But I did want to mention, we were speaking of the wonderful Paul Hellyer, God bless him, the late Paul Hellyer. Now, shortly before he died, maybe a month before, I was at a convention with him, and he told me that the Canadian government, to his knowledge, had treaties, formal, reciprocal activity going on with at least 85 different species. Now, and you can imagine if that's going on in Canada, certainly we're in bed with the US, so the same thing, probably even more so, is going on there. And I expect that it may be going on in a number of countries that has activity. How does this play in? Because again, we're talking, if this is in fact true, the amount of lies, how can we ever trust our government in any way again once this all comes out? How can we understand why they suppressed technology that had been offered to us that would have helped, cure diseases and deal with our ecological problems?
I think we're probably the most dangerous species out there.
Yeah, I agree.
Ourselves. Oh yes, we'll cure disease. We'll make the deserts bloom. Yeah, all of that, great. We're also great at what they call cooperative aggression. We humans are very good at organizing and killing each other and the rest of the world. Like, we're great at that. It's our best skill. And in fact, when you go back through human history, and I mean all the way back, I would argue there has never been a time in human history when we've been peaceful, cooperative, everything's one. I just don't think that we've ever been that way. We're aggressive, and we're ultra territorial. So we like to think, oh yes, give us the technology, it'll be great. You might trust yourself with a free energy device that can power, your home forever, and you could say up yours to your utility company and just live. But what if that free energy device can make a really, really great weapon and blow up half of an ocean? Would you trust yourself? Maybe. Would you trust every neighbor you have? Would you trust everyone in your city, in your country, in the world? There's going to be someone who's going to wreck the party. There always is. And so I don't really know that, if I were to put myself back in the 1940s, aliens are here. Are they actually going to be that naive? And I mean naive, to say to humanity, which had just gone through World War II, yeah, let's not forget that, and say, oh yes, we want to give you all of this technology because we believe you've earned our trust. Like, I don't think so. We just invented atomic weapons. They might very well be thinking these people are not to be trusted with high level. They just might. Now, maybe they're not to be trusted, for all I know. But if they're looking at us thinking they just did a First World War, they just did a Second World War, now you got these two superpowers with nuclear weapons pointed at each other, maybe they're not very trustworthy. I could just easily imagine that. So, but human governments have never, ever, ever been honest with their people.
That's right.
I don't think a single one. And it's not that we're inherently evil. It's just we are what we are. We're hierarchical, power. We love power. We just love power. We like to control the world. That's what we want to do. So, but the thing, back to the 85 species that that Paul Hellyer said we've made agreements with, or the Canadian government, I hold that in very strong reservation. There is no way that I could say that that is defensible. But what I would say is that over time, there have been a number of interesting individuals who have come forward that personally I find credible, that have indicated some level of communication with these other beings. I think of a fellow named Dan Sherman who wrote a book called Above Black. And there's something about that book. I think that he is onto something. And there's, the story of the late Bill Uhouse, who was an engineer and worked was military back in the 60s and talked about working on reverse engineering alien craft with alien beings there. Some level of cooperation was implied. There are some people who I think are kind of believable. It's not the same as proof. There's the story that goes back to the 1950s of President Eisenhower having the famous meeting with some group of aliens at or near Edwards Air Force Base in February of 1954. Did that happen? I think it's not impossible.
Was it not a Catholic?
That happened.
Was there not a Catholic cardinal present at that meeting, purportedly?
Yeah, there was a religious individual. There were a number of religious figures who were said to be there. There's different types of evidence for that I don't really know to this day how to evaluate. There's handwritten notes from a gentleman whose name was Gerald Light.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't know to make of some of this, but it's not impossible that in 1954, an ET group would want to meet with the president of the US. That's the year that we started detonating a lot of hydrogen bombs. And, out in the middle of the Pacific. And I could imagine they would be interested in talking with us.
Well, in Corso's book, which I think it's phenomenal, The Day After Roswell, he, of course, puts that original meeting back to Truman. And the same type of thing happened following, the three crashes at Roswell. There were not one, there were three. But, and Truman was apparently seen sobbing after this meeting by a number of people who on their deathbed confessions were willing to talk about it. Now that's another thing that I think is of consideration is it this bizarre American patriotism that keeps those that are left from telling what they know? Do they feel that they would be committing treason to reveal what they know? And wouldn't it be amazing if any of these individuals still living who have information to share were granted a, what should you call it? Just a carte blanche. Yeah, immunity. Exactly, legal immunity. Immunity from their the documents they sign when they join the military.
Yeah, I mean, it always makes sense in theory, but then when you get to it in practice, it's much more than even legal immunity. That is a problem. The United States, excuse me, does not really have very good whistleblower protection laws in place.
Mm-hmm.
This is, in fact, one of the things that the current UAP Disclosure Act is trying to fix. Because, like, if I wanted to be a whistleblower, let's just say, as it is right now, I could issue a complaint and I'd be in danger of losing my job, losing my paycheck, losing my pension, and then only after I'm vindicated would I necessarily be able to recover those things that I lost. Meanwhile, I'm out of luck and it's difficult. It's a lot of incentives against these whistleblowers. So by implementing a better protection, that would be useful, but there's still other obstacles within that classified world. And I am not an expert. I don't have security clearances myself. I never have. I'm not part of that world. But I do know some of those individuals, some of them with very extensive clearances. Yes, absolutely. And it's quite obvious that it's more than just legal ramifications that they're worried about. They want in. They're all trying to work their way into the center of the labyrinth. And they're all trying to play ball. And they want those secrets. They want them. Do they want them to enlighten the public, or do they just want them because they want them? Well, a lot of cases, I think it's the latter, probably. And they are willing to be team players. They want to play by the rules. And think of, 5 years ago, I was involved in a controversy when the notes pertaining to a meeting by Dr. Eric Davis and Admiral Thomas Wilson came out. For those who may not know, back in 2002, Eric Davis, a scientist, interviewed this retired admiral about that retired admiral's failed attempt to gain access to a reverse engineering program, very classified, in which they had a perfect alien disk that they were trying to figure out. This Admiral Thomas Wilson knew about it back in the late 90s, tried to get access, was denied access. There's a whole amazing story. And he talks at length to Davis, who took detailed notes. Those notes came out finally in 2019 after the death of astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who had a copy of them. So that's what happened. So what was Wilson's attitude? Deny, 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 deny. And this wasn't even a classified document. This was a private conversation that Wilson had with Davis. And it's 20 years after the fact, and he still would absolutely not admit to this, because that's the culture. That's the culture that these individuals are in. I think partly it is patriotism as they understand it. Yes. Partly, the folks that I've talked to who've had clearances, like, they obviously, that this is like probably the most important thing in their life are these security clearances.
I remember
Sometimes
Richard.
as much as their family, if not.
I have a very vivid memory of you and I sitting down having dinner after a presentation that I did in Rochester with the group that you're involved with, and we were sitting at the very end of the table, and you sort of leaned over the other way and looked at me, and you looked a little, not confused, but in some sort of personal jeopardy, and you said something to me. I've just had something dropped in my lap. And that was the papers that you were referring to. And what should I do with this stuff? I mean, you weren't asking me, anything, but I remember the look on your face, and you're someone who always exudes confidence, and the historical knowledge you've got, and then all of a sudden you get something that's of unequivocal importance, and you didn't know quite what to do with it.
I didn't. Those documents, I'll just very briefly, I was shown several pages of those notes back in 2006. So I'd known about them all through 07, 08, 09, and in fact, talked fairly directly about them to the extent that I could. The individual who showed them to me is someone I've never thrown under the bus. I've never given up his identity. Some people have their theories, but so I didn't, overstate what I knew, but I did state that I knew about the Wilson meeting and that he had been denied access. Like, I talked about that. But then there's only so far I can go without having the documents in my possession. And the story just seemed to die. And then they leaked. And yes, I got a copy sent to me anonymously back in April of 2019. And it was for 2 months that I wondered. And by the way, Canadian researcher Grant Cameron got them access to them before I did. And I remember talking with Grant in April and May of 2019, thinking, how are we going to get these to the public? Because I didn't want to be the guy to release these documents to the public. But I was determined that I would. I don't know how many months I was going to give it, but it wasn't going to be an indefinite amount of time, and I was. But anyway, I was talking with Grant, and he said, "Yep, now you're in the box that I'm in," because he didn't want to either. I wanted someone else to take the hit on that. It's that simple. And actually, someone else did release them, and I don't know who that person is, but I was the first person to talk publicly about them. But they had already been, I knew that they were out, and I thought, I'm just going to take the initiative and talk about them. So it's very important. The Wilson-Davis conversation is very important for people who are not familiar with this subject. I mean, you imagine a person who was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or I guess a deputy head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, who is told about rogue black budget programs to reverse engineer alien tech. That's what happened. And he looks into it, and he finds actually not one, but 4 such programs, talks to the managers of one of these programs, private corporations dominating it. And they basically tell him to take a hike. He says, well, I need to be supervising. They say, no, you don't. We're not letting you in. He says, I'll complain. They said, go right ahead. Be our guest. See how far that gets you. He did go back to DC. He did complain, and he was threatened with his career. That was the reward he got for trying to get control over what does appear to be a completely privatized UFO technology program. Who the hell's in control of this? Well, Wilson, as far as I could see, tried legitimately to get U.S. government oversight over this, and he failed. He was threatened by his superiors. So the attitude is, this is not something that ordinary government people need to be worried about. This is beyond. And then, when these people retire from office, what do? They end up working for these aerospace and technology companies.
Yeah, they do.
The money's better. The clearances are better frequently. So the money's all and the actions in the private sector, it appears. And that's what comes through with the Wilson conversation with Dr. Eric Davis. And I'll just say, I've had my own connection with that small group of people around Dr. Davis. I mean, I knew Edgar Mitchell somewhat well. I've known Dr. Hal Puthoff, and I've known Dr. Kit Green and some of these others. I can tell you, all of them focused on the privatization of secrecy. They all know this, what we call the UFO secret, goes way beyond government. And of course, everything goes beyond government. People talk about the US government. Like, what is the US government? Does anybody even really know? It's a labyrinth of competing factions that, is $1 trillion+ a year to keep the whole thing going. Everyone's got their own little empire. They don't always play nice in the sandbox. Who's running this? Well, I think that that what they believe is correct, which is that you have a privatized system in which the US government is essentially the private security force, police force for the private corporations that manage the UFO technology and science program. That's what I think
agree
it is.
more. Could not agree more. I think we have time for about one more question.
Yeah,
And then I want to talk about the new book,
Yeah.
even though it's mysteriously untitled. So
Before we get to that,
I have a title in there somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. We want you to talk about that for sure. The whole idea, Richard, of you've mentioned it in all of your comments so far, and I've learned a lot just in the last 15 minutes about what you're saying with respect to the government. One of the things that I've learned all over, especially from some contactees and other experiencers in different ways, that they often ask the question, why are we going to government cap in hand to ask them for the truth? This is our information. This belongs to the entire human family. It's not something that's hidden away someplace. There may be a lot of facts there, etc., all of that. But the fact that we're not alone in the cosmos belongs to every single human being on the planet. And how do we translate all these political machinations and all the national security state issues that you're describing? How do we translate all that whole huge constitution of knowledge? How do we translate that into this is owned by the human species, the fact that we're not alone? How do we get to that place?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've always believed that it's very important that we get an official government disclosure. Why? Because they belong to us. Government belongs to us. I don't belong to my government. My government belongs to me and all their citizens. And the Canadian government belongs to you. That's something that we should never let go of. So this idea that they need to answer to us is very important. It comes down to who is the sovereign entity in a nation, and it should be the people. That's right. But it's also true, like when people say, why do we need the government to disclose? There's a real point there. And I think it's very useful for widespread public engagement of this subject to continue to take place, because it's really only going to be through public opinion that we're going to be able to move this needle in the direction we want it to go, I think. And it's not going to be easy, by the way. When the internet was new 20+ years ago, many of us, myself included, thought, oh, well, now that we're in the age of information, it's going to be impossible to stop the truth from coming out. And what we've seen is, no, it's absolutely not impossible for them to stop it. There are all kinds of mechanisms by which to control the internet and to combat fake news and all this pernicious nonsense that we see going on around us in terms of controlling the public mind. And we've seen how good those managers, the technocrats of this world, we can see how good they are. They're very good. They are able to manage the public mind quite effectively on all kinds of things, not just UFOs, UAP, but geopolitics and everything else. So So it's not a given that we are, those of us who believe in truth on the UFO matter, it's not a given that we're going to be able to win this battle. There is a very sophisticated operation on the other side that, of course, they want to keep this secret forever. Of course they do. Like, this is too big a secret. It's like on every level, this is a bad thing for them to give up. You're in an era where you're never supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. Actively, conspiracy theorists are ridiculed and mocked even now. And so how would the US government deal with that by saying, well, I don't want you to believe in 9/11 or a COVID conspiracy, but yeah, the UFO conspiracy, I guess that was totally real. Like, that's a bad place for them to be in. They're not going to admit to the greatest conspiracy of all time and then say, but don't believe in these others, because basically you're being ruled by a group of criminals, and that's that. Like, so they're not going to cop to a grand conspiracy. Secondly, there are a lot of genuinely difficult matters to come out of a genuine UFO disclosure. We have to be honest about this. We have to recognize there is the potential of weaponry that can be utilized from this tech. There is the possibility of, we live in an era where, like, I'm in the US, and my country has lost its mind over foreign adversaries. I feel like I'm living in the early 50s again, and it's the Cold War
Xenophobia.
and McCarthyism. So Russia, China are supposedly going to they're just waiting for the chance to destroy us. Most of that, in my opinion, is US propaganda. I will say that until I can't have any strength left to say it. But there is a concern, if you are running your global military, why would you want those nations that you're trying to destroy to get access to this technology? Of course you wouldn't. So they have no incentive for giving this up. So that is why there is. And then, there's just the whole idea of how will it transform our infrastructure? We talk about energy. It would be wonderful, probably, if we had some kind of free, clean energy. We wouldn't pollute as much. We would still pollute. We're still going to dump plastics in the ocean. Who knows what we're going to do? But maybe some of the emissions will become less. But of course, is that really going to solve our problem? We're always, we got free energy 150 years ago when we got oil. Oil was basically free for its time, very powerful, easy to transport, and it gave us a lot of power. It allowed us to carve up the world into tiny little pockets. Was that really a great thing? Well, gave us a lot of power. Free energy would probably do that and even more. So I don't think that there's much of a solution, frankly, to the problem of the human being. I think that we're a very difficult problem.
Leslie's itching
that's where I'm
to-
at these days.
Yeah, Leslie's itching to get into the book, the book. No, the reason I'm sort of emphasizing it towards the end is that you've got all this stuff going on. Now, all of a sudden, we have a leading researcher, historian, talking about these things are underwater and they're moving back and forth from air to sea and all of this. And then almost implicit in that is the notion of possible bases in the water or whatever. Why are you getting into this? What took you there? What took
Yeah,
you
it's a
there?
good question. I started about 2.5 years ago. I have a website. It's called richarddolanmembers.com. It's got a great community, a lot of smart people. They've all got opinions on what I do right and what I do wrong. So they're wonderful. So one of the members of the website there just was asking me about a particular USO case that took place in the 1940s. And it's an interesting case off the Aleutian Islands. And I did a little bit of a presentation on it for the site, and I just became interested. This was in the spring of, what would that be, 2021, I guess, or 2022. God. And I ended up doing a series of presentations for my website, and that just morphed into an obsessive project. And then I thought, there is no single repository that had a reliable collection of all of these water-based UFO accounts. And I thought, let's just see how far this goes. And I've been doing that. And there's been a number of very large databases that I've had access to. I've been able to use those. And then there's a ton of websites and books and magazines. I paid $20 for this magazine just the other week from 1978. Why? Because I was trying to track down a particular story, which, by the way, I was able to. I was happy to do that. So it's just like all of these different sources, and I wanted to put them together and see where it went. And I've now collected 671 USO cases at this time, mostly covering the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, a couple from the 18th century. I have not included any genuine ancient USO accounts, although I have a special section where I talk about a few potentials. But what I can say is that this has been mind-blowing research. Mind-blowing. It's been amazing. Like, you know, the level of evidence, which I have a whole section where I gauge the quality of the evidence itself, every case. I do that. By and large, I think that these are solid cases. Many of them are strong cases, and several are what we can say certain in terms of the evidence level. So, but they're all interesting, and they are global. Many of them are indicate objects exiting a body of water, doing controlled entrance of the body of water, controlled entry, and also a lot of fast movers that are just under the water that are operating in ways that just don't make sense. I included a few cases where you have very low objects over the middle of the ocean, particularly if it involves someone's Navy. So, but by and large, 90+% of the cases are objects that are in the water, transmedium and that type of thing. It's incredible. It actually has blown my mind. And to say, you know, 671 cases sounds like a lot. It's actually not as much as I would like. I mean, I think that there is far more than what I've just been able to find. But these are inherently difficult types of cases to track down. I mean, A, most people don't live out in the middle of the ocean or in the middle of a lake. B, you know, if you see something like this, inevitably you're going to be living on the shore. So you're going to see something kind of close to the shoreline. So we're somewhat limited in what we're able to see. But even with all of those limitations, I'm in a state of virtual shock with the kinds of cases that I have found.
So all of a sudden you've got people with their iPhones looking up at the sky and taking pictures and doing videos, and now we've got people underwater with special goggles looking
Oh, yes.
at, you know,
Oh, yes,
I mean,
we do.
it could lead to a whole generation
yes.
of where to look for these things and why are they here, how long have they been there, with all the same questions and answers.
Well, there's some very compelling research that's been done in Catalina Island, which of course is sort of a hot spot for visual sightings, but under the water, there's some very intriguing formations that look they don't look like it doesn't look like a natural formation, it looks like a garage door. You know, there's...
I actually have a section on that. That's the Malibu Formation there. And, you know, that's interesting. And I think we still need more data on that, because what we really have not been able to do, because it's several thousand feet down, is get a good remotely operated vehicle down there to take images with a camera. So that would be useful. Catalina Island, that's all off the coast of LA. That is a hot spot. Puerto Rico is an even larger hotspot. And I just want to mention, since you're in Canada, you know, a land of an infinite number of freshwater bodies and lakes and ponds and everything, more freshwater than all other nations combined, has a lot of these cases out of lakes, particularly out west, out in British Columbia. There's quite a few very interesting cases that were recorded there that are very, very interesting. But also along the U.S. and Canadian northeastern corridor there, the Atlantic corridor. Quite a few cases have been recorded in the oceans there. And then, South America, coastal waters, the South China Sea, the the Western Pacific, like the coast of near Japan and Russia and that area. They're all fairly active to the extent that we're able to get information. There seems to be no part of the world where this is not happening. And it does lead to the question of are there bases down there? I mean, I would have to think, yes. There's a lot of speculation. Is there a base in the Puerto Rico Trench in the Atlantic Ocean? This is the deepest part of the Atlantic Ocean. There are a number of very interesting USO cases from around the Puerto Rico Trench. It wouldn't shock me in the least if there was something there.
All right.
But these
well,
things
we'll
are
look for
everywhere.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
No, that's it. I'm just going to say they cover the globe. For my book project, which
We will. Maybe you can come back and talk to us again when it's ready to be either edited or or published
mostly done.
or whatever. And
Mostly.
Richard, so now can people reach you through this website that you mentioned? What's the best way to be in touch with you?
Yeah, very likely. RichardDolanMembers.com. It's my my main website. There's a contact us tab there. People can write to me there anytime. It's not that difficult. I have a YouTube channel called Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure. I don't know if you can write to me that way, but you can see what I do there as well. So I stay very busy. This USO book project has been the dominant thing that I've been working on. I have a very wonderful illustrator who's done a lot of illustrations. I will be publishing it in 3 separate volumes. It has to be done that way. It's too much. So they'll be published one after the other very soon. And I think the first one will be out, I'm pretty sure this year.
Fantastic.
And then the volumes 2 and 3 will be out shortly after that.
Well, that's very exciting stuff. And Richard Dolan, we just have to thank you again for joining us. And what a mind-bending little sojourn this has been. Plenty to think about. And folks, make sure if you're interested in some of these things, you can reach out to Richard's various websites and his YouTube channel. And we'll look forward to seeing you again, and hopefully your beautiful wife too.
She's here. Tracy's
She's
running
here?
around.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Thanks, Richard, so much.
thank you, Richard.
It
Thank
was a
you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you both.
Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.